All right, thank you. I would like to call to order the June 27th, 2023 Natural Features Protection Review Board regular meeting. And the first item on our agenda, I'd like to provide an update, which is our new member, Laura Frederickson, welcome, is already confirmed by the city clerk with the NFP bylaws and does not require a swearing in. So we'll just go ahead and get started today. Jamie, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Colwick.
Here.
Fuller. Frederickson. Here. Glasser. Leto.
Here.
Martin.
Here.
Sylvester.
Here.
Great. Can I get a motion to excuse absent members?
So moved. Support.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great. Next up on the agenda is the adoption of today's agenda. Can I get a motion to adopt the formal agenda with one change? We will approve both April and May 2023 minutes. Is that the only change, Jamie?
Yes, that's correct. And those April minutes are in your packet if you need a moment to take a look at those.
Yeah. Okay, motion to adopt the formal agenda with the change to include both the April and May 2023 minutes.
I'll motion.
Okay,
Support.
great. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great, motion passes. Next, we have the approval of the meeting minutes from April. Wait, do I do this too?
Yeah, this will be approving minutes from both
Okay,
April
great.
and May.
Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from both the April and May 2023 NFP meetings? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Can we get a motion and a support for that?
Oh, great. A support, please.
Support.
Okay. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great. I'm a little rusty today. Next up, we have general citizen comments. If there are any comments from the public, please come forward and state your name, and you'll have 3 minutes on the board up there. No? Okay. Nolan, do we have any callers?
No callers at this time.
Thank you, Nolan. Next, before we move on to new business, I would just like to know if there's any comments from the board. No? Okay. I'd just like to welcome Laura again, and we're back to a full board of 7, so that's really great for reaching quorum during busy field seasons. I know a lot of us are out all around the state traveling and stuff, so thank you. On to new business is the approval of the NFP site plan for the project located at 1400 Harrison Street. I think we'll start off with a presentation from our staff or applicant.
Yeah, Nolan, did you want to load anything up on the main, or do you want me to go ahead with the staff report? Okay, I don't have unfortunately all of those details in front of me, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about the plan and how it changed from last month. So this was reviewed by the board last month, and I think the main key piece of detail that was asked for was a landscape plan showing native species all along Harrison Street, the frontage of the property. There was also a question from Director Fuller about whether the 2 trees that were being removed on the property how they were meeting the tree standard instead of the woodland standard, because from the aerial photograph on the map and on the site plan, it appeared that there was perhaps more of a canopy that would lend itself to the definition of woodland. So per those two items, the site plan in front of you today, it's in your packet. It has a new sheet added that shows the landscape plan. So you can see the shrubs and trees that are being proposed along Harrison Street. Those are native species with some cultivars in the mix there. And so I think for today's approval, we're looking for any board comments on whether you think any of those, if you have any input on some of those cultivar species. Certainly the more natural habitat in this property is all along the Kalamazoo River, and it very quickly transitions into much more industrial properties. And so I think the plantings, as far as staff's review, the plantings are very appropriate. They are native species and kind of match the other landscaping that's kind of done all along the different properties and street frontage in this section of Harrison. No, Harrison and Patterson, excuse me. So these, the landscaping is actually along Patterson. So that's there for you to review. Staff found it acceptable. That's our recommendation to approve. Again, if you have comments, I'm happy to take those into consideration. The other piece, though, was the applicant did provide staff with a narrative on how they concluded that the area to the north of the clarifier met the tree standard. We as staff had talked about doing a site visit out at the site to kind of, confirm that narrative, and sort of through that process over the last few weeks, the applicant and staff became aware of, we were aware of an EPA project that's happening along the Kalamazoo River, but during that period, that area has been cleared by EPA contractors as a staging area for contaminated sediment removal that's happening, dredging out of the river. And it's, I don't have a plan in front of me because EPA is not subject to our local zoning rules, but those projects regularly replant all of the areas that they use for staging. And so I would fully expect that there will be a replanting, restoration plan for that area. That removes that need to remove those trees from this plan, though. So that's why you're seeing that on the updated plan that's in front of you today. I think those were sort of the main points from last month, but I would invite the applicant up if you want to add anything that I may have missed or elaborate on any of those details and what you're planning for the site there.
Folks had really expanded their area back there, so they did do a good job of trimming up the nicer trees along the river, though, too. So, yeah. So, and Tim had a heart attack earlier today too when he called me. He saw that they were gone. So, that was out of our control. And I do think that this landscaping plan. I mean, Lori, the same person that did the design further west on Patterson when we did the projects last year, so it should match the landscaping design. So.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Do any board members have questions for our?
I guess, do the EPA activities affect your sequencing of the project as far as being able to do things on the schedule you had previously hoped for?
No. So they're going to do some work this year. The work that we need to do in that area is actually going to be done next year in combination with the City of Kalamazoo wastewater treatment plant project. So the earthwork that we're going to be doing out there, we've been meeting with James Baker, and we're going to coordinate that with their efforts in 2024. So.
Okay, thank you.
I appreciate you guys providing us with the landscaping plan, and yeah, I feel like it's a move in the right direction with some native species interspersed with the cultivars. I think a lot of it has to do with sourcing, so
yeah, it'll help shield some of those trailers that are there too, so a little west of the site. So yeah.
Any other comments, since that was Director Fuller isn't here today and that was her main point of concern about this applicant?
I just had one quick question. Do you happen to know what dimensions the Diablo 9 bar could get to?
I'm not the landscape architect. I'm actually covering for her today, so I'm a civil
Yeah.
engineer, but I'm not sure.
So I see the height at 36 inches. Are you
That's
talking about
usually-
the?
Yeah, that's usually referring to the height when planted. I was wondering when it's full grown, if that 5-foot wide planting bed's gonna be sufficient.
It should be. Lori wouldn't have done that if it wasn't wide enough. So my guess is those are going to be 3-foot tall bushes from the looks of it. So I can confirm that though.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the species like from in the wild. It sounds like maybe kind of like a native type thing, but it gets pretty big in the wild. But this could, potentially be smaller, shorter, but I can't say for sure.
Yeah. I have 2 in my yard, and they're about 4 years old and maybe 6 feet tall. But yeah, I don't know.
But yeah, overall, I don't see any like major red flags with the planting list. Looks pretty solid to me.
Yeah, I'll just second that. We always try to encourage folks to go the full native species route if they can, but we know that there are some varieties that are developed for different purposes that may be urban settings or specific plantings and spacings and that sort of thing. And as Dr. Kolick mentioned, sometimes sourcing of those can be a challenge in the size or quantity that are needed. But yeah, I appreciate working in the existing honey locust and around all the existing vegetation. So, but I similarly thought it looked good.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. I just want to leave one moment for any other comments, discussion among the board. This is definitely a different proposal, given the EPA removal of those trees this week. So I think we'll go ahead and put it to a vote. So can I entertain a motion to approve the NFP site plan for the project located at 1400 Harrison Street? And that's also subject to the receipt of the MNFI rare species survey. So we all saw the report from MNFI, and they'll be doing an on-the-ground survey there, and given that that doesn't have any issues.
Yeah, we've received notification that they're going to get somebody out probably in a couple weeks. So
Okay.
Cool.
Good.
Sorry, actually not to commandeer your trajectory towards an approval. I was going to ask, Jamie, looking back in the minutes from May, there was some discussion around potentially planting in an unoccupied area that looked like mowed lawn to the east of the clarifier. It was not in the proposed area for building up infrastructure, and it looks like it's just south of the area the EPA will be clearing for trees. So I had seen that there was discussion about potentially planting that in part to mitigate the non-compliance of the driveway within the 25-foot buffer of the river. Now, obviously, some of that's a little bit of a moot point with the EPA footprint there, but assuming that they'll follow up with some kind of planting activity, I'm just wondering if that space could be utilized too, since that was part of the original conversation. I just didn't see any updates on that.
Yeah, are you talking about the existing drive lane that will now be paved along sort of that southeast corner of the clarifier? Yeah, I think everything kind of up to that point is proposed to remain vegetated, like the vegetation won't change along the riparian edge. And the way the zoning code read, there's a specific part of the code that allows for any existing pavement, whether conforming or non-conforming, to be, or excuse me, existing gravel drive or parking lot to be paved. And so staff didn't make that request to have them like add anything in addition, because we didn't feel like the code required it, and therefore we didn't have that authority to ask for more. But I think that because they're leaving the vegetation in place, that was documented on the application from last month, was just that all of the existing riparian buffer vegetation is being used or utilized and remains in place as that riparian buffer requirement for NFP. So I think it's kind of covered in what's already there, but further, I don't think the code is requiring the applicant to add anything additional.
Okay. I just remembered it was kind of a gray area because it's pre-existing, but it's also non-compliant. And if they have to replant that area and it's just, lawn that's going to cost, maintenance to mow and things like that, whether that could be expanded to the south of where this EPA remediation area is on our map. So I think that was my memory of what was discussed. I don't think anybody had an issue with the 25-foot setback. So, but I'm guessing there would be more details to come on the EPA replanting.
Yeah, it's my hope that that area is replanted nicer than it is now. So,
Yep.
yeah,
So you're waiting for a motion?
I am. Would you like me to reread it?
No, you did a very good job of stating it, and so I will make that motion.
Okay.
Support.
Thank you. Okay. Do we want to continue the conversation before we put it to a vote?
You can ask, you can ask for any additional comments
Any
from the board?
additional?
I just thought that last comment you just made is a good example of how this board adds value to some of these applications where, you bring information and knowledge to these evolving plans. So I thought that was a really good example of something I've observed for some months.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
All right, so we will now have a roll call vote on the motion to approve the NFP site plan for the project located at 1400 Harrison Street, subject to the receipt of the MNFI rare species survey.
All right, Colwick.
Yes.
Frederickson?
I am going to abstain since I was not part of this from the beginning.
Director Leto?
Yes.
Director Martin?
Yes.
Director Sylvester?
Yes.
All right, passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, on to old business, review of the NFP standards in Chapter 50-6.2 of the City Zoning Code and revised amendments, the second draft. We have a link in our agenda to that, and so I think we'll have a discussion.
Yeah, I'm going to go set up here at the podium because then I think you'll be able to read very small letters on that screen, but then I'm going to walk you through just kind of
Okay.
how the most recent draft has been updated.
Great, thank you.
All right, so you should see that on the screen in front of you. I just wanted to circle back and get any sort of last feedback from this board. We've spoken pretty extensively over the last, I think, 2 meetings about some of the zoning code updates that have been happening really as part of a larger commercial rezoning that's happening across the city. But it does allow staff the opportunity to make some recommendations to Plan Commission to change the zoning code in its, across the entire zoning code. And there seem to be a couple of updates to Article 6, the Nfp Overlay District, that felt like a good time for this board to kind of review and make a recommendation to Plan Commission as well. So, to get us started, I know one of the items that has been a really important point of discussion has been what the intent of the NFP Overlay District is. Again, this is because intent is referenced one time in the review criteria for granting a variance or some type of relief. And I really like how City Planner has helped us put together this sort of 3-part intent, and I think it kind of covers the 3 items that this board talked about last month. And so again, just looking for any additional input that we need, really just kind of doing that check that the amendments as we see now, and this version came out last week, that this is something that's good to go forward to Plan Commission. At the end, I'll talk about that, that approval process and what the timing is looking like. But here, the first part of the intent is preserved in how it looks today, but then we've added 2 additional pieces to the intent, and that is number 2, to guide site development, balancing growth and redevelopment with the protection of our existing natural features. So last month we talked a lot about how that balancing is really important. And then 3, the intent is to create site designs that are responsive to existing natural features and minimizes impacts to the extent possible. So when members of this board are looking at a variance request, they can look at these 3 pieces of, these 3 parts of the intent and kind of judge, does this variance impair the intent of, or go against the intent of NFP? Because oftentimes an applicant is asking for a little bit of relief, but I think the expectation is that they're still trying to follow the standard as closely as they can, barring some hardship that they're demonstrating. So then this kind of gives you 3 pieces of that intent criteria to review against. We had a couple of other changes, so if you'll bear with me while I scroll and don't get too dizzy. We talked about, the rest of the standards remain the same. We're not changing any of the actual meat of those standards. We are looking a little bit at the kind of the last section that we call development criteria, so just other site development standards. We went ahead and revised item 2 because it references an old wellhead protection overlay, which has now been revised by Public Services and already approved as its own standalone ordinance. So the new language references that new ordinance, which is Chapter 39. It's a standalone wellhead protection ordinance. The one thing that I'm still, staff is still recommending that we remove is this B, outdoor storage of loose materials is prohibited within 500 feet of a water resource or wetland. I went back and looked at the Chapter 39, and that has also been removed from Chapter 39 and also doesn't have a definition for loose materials. I think that question came up last month. What I did find out, though, city planner let me know that loose materials are regulated across the city in another part of the ordinance. They are not strictly prohibited, but there are a whole set of rules and standards around how they need to be properly secured, what's allowed or not allowed to be stored outdoors. It has to be contained and in a container of a certain height. And so I think the whole idea here is that it's protecting the city generally from sort of a release or litter, debris, things that can move around on a site. And so having looked at that, staff's still recommending that part of the ordinance, it applies to all of our NFP sites and feel like it's protective enough against the idea of anything, getting out of, containment area and into like a water resource the way that the ordinance is written right now. So I think it's just an activity in trying to reduce some of the redundancy within the code and kind of clean it up. Section 3, I think we were good with last month, but that was, again, modifying, but leaving in this contiguous area so that there are still lot coverage requirements. So you can't, property boundary to property boundary, create a completely impervious lot. Every zoning type throughout the city has a certain amount of coverage, somewhere between 60 to 80% that can be covered. And so what this, though, is still asking sites to do for NFP is to make sure that those pervious areas that are left behind are contiguous in some fashion. And so this still lays that out here. And that those areas should also be preserved against and sort of near natural features, again, as just one more layer of protection against those natural features. And then, let me just scroll to the very end because we do have, and you're going to see these little additions, right? Another correction for Chapter 39, and also some consistency in some verbiage that is throughout the ordinance, right? We're not saying single family, we're calling everything detached unit home. So you'll see some of those changes in that section. The one thing that we didn't talk about last month that I also would like to get some feedback on is some meaningful changes to Section M, violation and penalty. Right now it reads just penalty, and it lays out the penalties that the city can levy against a site that's found in violation of their NFP site plan. But what we've found is, as we've approached these sites, the way our normal violation or penalty process goes is that a site is given an initial violation letter, and they're given a certain amount of time to remedy the violation. And what we'd like to propose is that the NFP review board be inserted into that remedy by asking the applicant to come forward to the board. And we've already been discussing as staff, there will be at least one more revision to this code, and we think it might need just even a little more specificity on exactly when in the violation process applicant is required to come before this board. But the idea is that, we issue a letter, we ask them to remedy, and then we ask them to give us also like a response that says, what it is they plan to do. And I think and then we're able to kind of release that violation. It goes through our inspection staff, and they've often kind of done that unilaterally, with certainly some working back and forth with staff like myself. However, in some of our most recent discussions, I was kind of asked, hey, so would this remedy that they're suggesting be sufficient? Would it actually, repair or mitigate some of the harm that may have been done on the site? And I didn't feel like we necessarily had the staff that would have the right expertise to weigh in on every kind of natural features violation that we might see. And for that reason, it felt like getting this board to weigh in and approve that remedy might be really valuable, because I think you all can say, what is the degree of damage or concern with a certain natural feature. Certainly, we ask the applicants to pay for their own professionals to go out to the site, who can weigh in, with the right professional credentials and provide some input. But then we felt like it would be more of a check to have this board at the very end of that kind of sign off and say, okay, we agree that this remedy now, fixes this violation. And then certainly the city on our side would continue to impose any sort of court fees or fines or costs if it takes a certain amount of time to get to that end point.
I was just going to comment. I think that seems like a reasonable place to put us. It seems like where our function fits in is where the gray area and the nuance in the NFP site plans are, if they're asking for a variance or if there's something that doesn't quite fit. And so, because trying to replace the natural feature is pretty much always apples to oranges, the 150-year-old trees cut down, you can't really have a perfectly mitigated, action to compensate for that. So I think it makes sense to bring us in early, sort of to take into account the nuance and before sort of actions are taken. So that seems to make sense to me.
Yeah, I have a statement/question. So far, every NFP case we've had has been triggered by the site review process, right? So we haven't had any cases yet that are maybe someone's, cutting down trees on their property or developing, you know what I mean? So I see, it's hard for me to wrap my head around what a violation like this might look like. Are we thinking it would probably be a situation where someone doesn't know or doesn't think to do an NFP application because there's no site plan? So they're not necessarily building a parking lot or a building or expanding. They just don't want those trees because they'd rather have their whole area be lawn. So I'm just wondering, and then I guess the second part of that would be the way we would find out about these violations would be from someone reporting it to the city most likely, or, I mean, can you just give me an idea?
Yeah, I could give you some examples. So I believe it was last year, or it could have been late 2021. Exactly, we had a complaint called into the city. We sent an inspector out to a site along Portage Creek. It was in the Nfp Overlay district. What had happened, there was soil brought onto a site, and the owner hadn't really planned for, hadn't put together a site plan. They were thinking about a future commercial development or residential development, and they had the opportunity to get some clean fill. However, per our city development rules, that would require some site plan review. It would require erosion control, right, to bring on sediment and to kind of regrade. So the owner, it was one of those examples. The owner was unaware that they needed some permission, and that wasn't exactly, they kind of got partial permission and thought they were covered. And so we, had some staff, I guess, building official issued a violation. So we came together with the site owner, and they had a consultant they brought on board and said, hey, what do we need to do to make this right? And we said, you need to get into the site plan review process and have us, look at the site and tell us about your future plans. And you need to remove the soil for now. It can't be there. It has to be removed from the site. And that's one of those remedies that would be really valuable to bring forward to this board. Do you find it acceptable that they just remove the soil? Maybe in this case, and it wasn't, they kind of brought it into a kind of a gravelly drive. It was the access to the site, and they kind of just dumped it there and staged it there. But had there been any more natural features damages, this board might be able to weigh in and say, yep, once you scrape and remove the soil, revegetate. Or I think that this board could just add a lot of value into just weighing in on any other natural features, protections, or remedies that might have to happen. I think, yes, we certainly could come across a site that does work, especially in a residential single-family setting, that they do work without a permit and maybe, violate in some way the NFP. And then also, I think we're going to see, and this was an enforcement case that's being worked through at the city, but we had some construction fencing issues at the Kalamazoo Country Club. And so there were some root zones that staff went out and inspected a couple of different times to see if there was damage to those root zones. And we had some discrepancy on where that construction fencing was supposed to go. And I think, we kind of got to the bottom that it was all fine per the plan. But it was one of those cases that brought attention to staff that had there been a real serious violation, what would have been enough? What would have remedied any sort of violation to a site plan? So in some cases, it might be an approved site plan that doesn't get followed because there's a variety of contractors in the field doing different work, trying to follow these plans, and so we know that that could be a case that could come forward to a board like this.
Those are really good examples, and I think that one site on Portage Road was near Cork Street, and it was somebody, and I remember that site, and that you had made comment that had drifted in through a complaint. And I would note that those examples she gave, although the language has now changed, but those are examples where this process does support development in the sense of the word support, as I understand it. If I neutralize value in that word, that's support to me of development. It's helping development stay legal, stay in the lane, and to be a contributor to the tax base of Kalamazoo. So I just wanted to make that sidebar comment to my colleagues here.
Thank you. I have just one other comment, which is So when it says a civil fine of up to $5,000, so if we have someone that goes and clears a large lot and with the price of lumber today, they can make a huge amount of money. That's fine in some ways, for some infractions, like a minor infraction, that seems like a lot, but that cap for any possible malicious intent, if they figure, well, we're going to clear this parcel before we get a site plan or start with rezoning it so we can have a fresh, I don't really anticipate seeing any sort of nefarious actions like that, but is this typical to have this cap that is for some, potential developers, and given the price of, a single walnut tree's lumber, that $5,000 seems like someone could just say, we'll pay the fine and keep going.
Yeah, I guess I would point out number 3, which says each day a violation exists or continues shall be deemed a separate offense. So they could be getting a $2,500 up to $5,000 fine for every day until they remedy the situation, right? So they get that violation notice, which can be a civil infraction, which is therefore admissible in court. That's how these get settled eventually. If they are not remedied right away, is that the city then would enact a court case, and then these fees and the final remedy, which would in this case probably be replanting those trees, which again, I think if you really tried to play the system and abuse it, maybe you could end up financially ahead of the game. But I think this is trying to ward that off as much as possible. This feels like if you can get a $5,000 fine or $2,500 fine every single day, it's sort of a diminishing return on whatever benefit you were getting from removing that natural feature.
And I assume this mirrors violation of the zoning ordinance, since
That's correct.
Since what we're doing is related to the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
So probably.
I just wanted to make sure I was reading that correctly, that it's not up to 5,000.
It's a good question, though, yes.
Yeah. This isn't my
Yeah, I was
area
just
of
going to comment. I
expertise.
think that's a good observation. I think removal of trees, excessive or in advance, is kind of potentially likely if a violation were to occur. Thinking about other natural features that we cover, open water and wetlands, they have their own set of standards that Eagle or other agencies would impose on that individual as well. So they would obviously be nested in there, and they may already be facing a violation from the state in addition. But trees obviously don't have that same coverage, so.
I want to make space for other comments on what she just spoke about. If you guys, okay.
Chair Colwick, I have one other comment too. It's not in this section, but I wanted to, just remind the board that there's also an existing section under the ordinance right now that allows this board to determine whether there is any sort of financial assurance that a project has to provide as part of their site plan approval. And staff has been trying to be proactive in making that recommendation to this board when you approve site plans. And I'll go back to the country club as an example. That was a site plan whereby the city required a bond to be issued for any sort of natural feature impacts that were unanticipated for, just knowing the size and scale of that project. And so there is an existing bond that could be called upon if needed, if there was some sort of natural feature damage that wasn't authorized through the site plan process. And then we kind of worked with the developer to figure out when that would be released, right? And as far as that milestone, we kind of agreed that once the all of the regrading and replanting is done, then that bond can be released.
That's really interesting. How did you determine the amount of that bond?
We also asked the developer to give us a quote for the acreage that was being removed, or I think it was the acreage to remain on site, right? They had this variance to remove a certain amount, and then so whatever was supposed to remain, they calculated that and then gave us quotes from a contractor to what a replanting would look like, and then we asked the city arborist to weigh in on whether that number felt like a reasonable number, and now I can't remember what the bond full amount was, but it was, north of $100,000 to replant trees. So, yeah, that's how we went about doing that. We did allow the applicant to propose what they thought would be reasonable, since they're, they have their general contractor out there. They kind of know the site the best.
That makes a lot of sense. When we were first organizing, we talked about bonding and how that would be codified, and it really seemed like it needed to be custom tailored, specific to the job and the specific site. So that sounds like that was well handled.
It's a bit of a more proactive way to protect natural features instead of leaning just on the violations and penalty side of things, which is really what we want to avoid. But we thought that, again, that stop at the NFP review board would be a good addition to the code. And that just came about, again, like I said, in the last month, where we thought, if we are asked to staff, hey, what is the proper remedy, or someone proposes what they think is the remedy, how would we be able to judge if that's appropriate? And we thought this, 7-member board was a good way to do that.
Quick question. So when someone goes through the NFP process with their plan review, do you have a formal inspection process after construction that is signed off on before they get official approval like you do with a building?
Yes, so it's kind of integrated into our building and trades, but we also have a zoning code inspector too on staff. And so we're also working right now to integrate in with our existing staff. It's buildings trade staff who go out at the beginning when permits are issued to make sure all of like silt fencing and some of that protection fencing is up. And we want to integrate in that NFP fencing is on the plan. The plan you saw today, we did ask them to add the fencing in there. Makes it so our inspectors can tell right away, yes, it's in place, it's in the right location. And then there's multiple inspections kind of throughout the process, depending on how big the site is, right? If this is fully interior work, then we're just going to have the building trades folks there inspecting and signing off on finalizing permits. And then, yes, at the end of each, kind of to close out before a site would get its certificate of occupancy, we certainly have within our system, we have sort of those permit closeouts from all of our building and trades folks, but we have the zoning code inspector as well sign off that the site matches the original site plan or any amendment that might have come forward. And we're just getting through that process right now for a site that you all approved. It's changed names over time, but it's the Heritage Community retirement apartment complex that they built. That one had a change in contractors. It's been really drawn out for a couple of years, but they did finish all of their landscaping this year. And so our both our zoning code inspector and our site plan manager, it's been kind of a group effort. I've been involved, been out there just confirming that that site received a variance. So making sure that that variance was followed and the site plan was followed. And I think that site is an example of where things had changed a little. And so they, made sure that the site plan was all squared away and followed kind of that original variance. So there is it's a pretty good amount of inspection and oversight. It's probably not perfect, and you can imagine these sites get kind of large and complex. So we are trying to be proactive again on the front end to make sure things are pretty well spelled out on the site plan so that we can, keep everyone accountable throughout that process.
Excellent. Thank you.
I just had one comment about the intent section. I missed the last couple board meetings, and thanks to Director Leto for chairing those. And also I found Director Fuller's. I was able to stream the meetings I was out of town for. And so I was able to keep up on the conversation. And I also have heard not just the comments here, but also from out in the community about the intent and support statement. And I am really pleased with the new language, especially compared to the second iteration, which was kind of stating what it was not rather than what it is. And I think that I really appreciate everyone's comments, and I just wanted to kind of revisit this because we didn't stop and have comments after Jamie was going through this section, but I was just, since it was the source of a lot of comments from the community and disagreement, I just wanted to revisit it for a minute and make sure everyone feels good before you guys go back to rewrite this and get towards a final draft.
I'll just say that I like this version a lot. I appreciate Jamie and working with city planner and others to kind of make this fit what the board felt comfortable with, and getting further clarification for the community on what NFP does do and what it doesn't do seems relevant here, given the general inquiries that we kind of hear about NFP issues. I think the balancing is a key wording in there, responsive to natural features, but just kind of starts out with the original intent definition that it's basically a zoning district that regulates against protection of natural features. So I thought it's well crafted given the board feedback and everything.
Yeah. So I have no comments with this new version. Yeah.
If I could speak a little bit to timing. So as I mentioned, this came out in the last week and a half, and there are going to be, there's going to be an upcoming meeting. I believe it's this Thursday. Nolan, am I getting that date right? Yeah. But I would point out, everyone should go to imaginekalamazoo.com. You'll see commercial zoning as a project going on there, and you'll get all the details. This is going to be, again, vetted with the community for a little while. City planner said that the plan would be to go over this extensively with the Planning Commission in August to give them this version or any sort of final changes right up to that point. So covering it in detail in August, and then introducing it to Planning Commission for a vote in September, and then turning around and getting it on City Commission agenda. Just with the timing of Plan Commission meeting, that may fall at the end of September, but more likely it would be 2 meetings in October before Commission would approve any sort of changes. So they'll have a public hearing, and then the next meeting that they would vote on any changes. So, it's a little ways off, but, really coming in the next couple of months to Plan Commission formally as a final draft in August, we're expecting.
Do you have a question just in general, looking at the commercial updates and the different zoning updates that are proposed in the map? I guess how that speaks back and forth with NFP, if it's more that NFP is a layer on everything regardless of what the zoning code is, and it's the function of the city is looked at, and then the NFP simply applies to that regardless of what it is. For example, looking at the live-work district, which seems like it's a totally new district, and striking out some of the commercial districts. And when I looked at the table, what was it called? The zoning table about what kind of uses are allowed, it seems like it's very flexible. So it seems like many things could be done with those parcels, and it makes sense. A lot of units now have residential on top, commercial on bottom, things like that. So I guess my question is kind of vague at this point, but how, if at all, NFP interacts with what designations those areas are given in the updated version, or if NFP is simply a review process to be gone through regardless of what the zoning district is.
Yes, so the latter that you just said there, the NFP rules layer on another set of rules on top of the existing zoning use that's controls in the zoning code. So the idea when NFP was created was that it was flexible enough or adaptable enough that you could apply it over any of the underlying zoning criteria. We tried really hard to do that. I don't think we've seen like any sort of direct conflict in the application so far. Certainly, I haven't looked closely at some of the downtown districts, and we kind of intentionally left NFP out of the downtown, knowing that these are, tight, dense areas that most of the nature is a couple of trees at the road frontage, and so, and even the water body that goes through downtown is a very engineered concrete channel, and so to kind of, I think, avoid conflict with those districts, we kind of worked around the Nfp Overlay district, but they're supposed to work together, and so that these changes, again, I think city planner was definitely thinking about, and staff were thinking about NFP when these changes were made. But you're right, like Live Work 1, Live Work 2, they are existing in certain parts of the city. They're newer in the last few years. They are trying to offer some really flexible uses. And it's a form-based code, essentially. So they're really looking at what that building type looks like and not being so concerned with what goes on inside that building.
Thanks.
And I just wanted to put this up here, public meeting on June 29. So 6:30 to 8 at City Hall, this room. And that one will be live streamed too and recorded if anyone wants to check it out at a later date.
All right. Is that all for the standards update?
That's all I got. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. Next, we have staff updates, which, is there anything additional while you're up there?
I do not have any staff
Okay.
updates. Nolan, do you have any updates you want to give? All right. I think we're all set. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Next is announcements. All right. I guess I just had, I don't know if it's an announcement or a comment, but Director McNallis was our vice chair, and I think we do not have a vice chair. Director Leto has been stepping up and chairing meetings in my absence, but you already served your chair couple of years, so I'm not suggesting we take any action today. It's just something to think about. Current members.
Yeah, I can, maybe I'll work with you, Chair Colwick, to talk about reaching out to other board members on who might want to serve in those roles next. And I've been announcing but haven't finalized a date. Maybe you and I can also work on that for like an annual meeting of the board so they can nominate and elect some new executive officers and move forward from there. But yes, you're right. We are currently without a vice chair, technically.
Any other announcements before I adjourn? Okay. And that's it. Adjourn meeting.
You have to use the, yeah.
I do, don't I? Okay, there.